Hello everyone, and welcome to my 2018 year in review. This video will cover statistics, the worst and the best of what I read in 2018. I read 118 books last year. 23 were graphic novels, 7 were short stories, and 2 were poetry collections. There are 4 projects that I track. Project New includes new to me books by new to me authors. I read 54 of those last year. Project SAMS, which stands for Same Author, More Stories, includes new to me books by authors I've read before. I read 56 of those last year. Project TBR includes books from my physical TBR shelves, so the books that I physically own that I have not yet read. Last year I read 37 of these books. And last is Project Reread. I reread 8 books last year. Let's take a look at representation. I look at authors and main characters across 4 categories, whether or not they're a woman, POC, queer, or Jewish. Most of the 118 books I read were written by a woman and featured a woman. Only 12 of the books I read were written by POC, which is a lot lower than I thought. I'm really disappointed in this number and hoping to increase that this year. Interestingly, over 3 times as many main characters are POC, which is great. It just means that I'm not reading as many own voices books. A decent chunk were written by or featured queer people. Tracking Jewish authors and main characters is something I only very recently started to do, and it's definitely a category I look to expand, especially as far as main characters are concerned. For the genre spread, unsurprisingly, the majority of the books I read were fantasy or sci-fi. There were 42 fantasy, 31 sci-fi, 15 romance, 13 historical, 10 contemporary, 6 horror, and 1 mystery. Mystery, as you can tell, is not really my thing, and this mystery book happened to be in the Amelia Peabody historical archaeology mystery series that I have been reading on and off for several years. I don't really read it for the mystery, I read it for the characters. Let's take a look at the ratings. My average rating for the year was 3.23. I read 13 1 stars, 4 1.5 stars, 12 2 stars, 8 2.5 stars, 18 3 stars, 10 3.5 stars, 30 4 stars, 11 4.5 stars, and 12 5 stars. I read 36 books over 7 readathons. I read 11 books for Tome Infinity and Beyond, 5 for the A to Z Readathon and Queer Lit Readathon, 7 for Booktubeathon, 3 for the Contemporaryathon and Maidathon, and 2 for Screamathon. I DNF'd a total of 12 books this year. Books that I DNF rate anywhere from a 1 to a 2 star. I don't actively dislike every book that I DNF. 4 of the books I DNF'd just weren't for me. The rest I had significant problems with in one form or another and actively disliked. In addition to those last 8 books that got a 1 star on my DNF list, the 3 1-star books that I actually did finish were The Owl Service, Candide and the Secret of the Mists, and Arch Enemies. Let's look at my most disappointing books. These aren't necessarily the worst books of the year. They're just the ones that I had, for one reason or another, higher expectations for, and they didn't quite meet those expectations. Most of the time, when I read a book by a new to me author, I might have some preconceptions, but given how widely varied my reactions to books that are popular or unpopular can be, I don't typically go in expecting to have one reaction or another. But for authors I've read before and enjoyed, I generally expect to enjoy other books they've written. For 6 of those books, that was not the case. Marissa Meyer really let me down with the first 2 books of her Renegade series. Gail Carriger's Etiquette and Espionage, which starts a YA series in the same universe as the Soulless series, which I loved, fell into a lot of the YA tropes that I really don't like. The sequel to Chocolat by Joanne Harris was, for me, a dumpster fire and did a horrible disservice to what made Vianne's character so great in Chocolat. The 3rd and final book of the Themis Files series by Sylvain Neuvel really disappointed me. I started to dislike the series because of one particular incident in the 2nd book, and the last book did not redeem it. Another 3rd and final book in a trilogy was Generation Warriors by Anne McCaffrey. I enjoyed most of the first 2 books in this series, but the 3rd book really fell apart for me. I'm currently reading another Anne McCaffrey book that's set in the same universe as this series, and unfortunately, I think Anne McCaffrey is kind of broken for me right now, but we'll see how this current book turns out. The last 4 books on this most disappointing books list were books that, for one reason or or another based on what I had heard about them or based on the premise. I really thought I would enjoy them, and it turns out that I didn't. Oh, the entire category of most disappointing books ranges anywhere from a 1 to a 3 star. So Swords Point was a 3 star. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't as good as I thought it would be just based on the hype I had heard about it. The Book Jumper had a great premise, but the execution fell flat for me. Throne of Glass is all over the place. I'm sorry if you are watching this video and you're one of the people who raves about this series. Personally, I thought it was a dumpster fire. The Sword of Rhiannon is an old sci-fi story written by a woman, not just by a woman, but the woman who wrote the initial screenplay for The Empire Strikes Back, the best Star Wars movie, and I was really disappointed that this book had so many problematic aspects. Let's get into the positive stuff. The most surprising books of the year were surprising to me in various ways. The first category are books that I really thought I would dislike, but for some reason there was something about it that made me want to give it a try, and I ended up enjoying them. Furman by Sam Savage is told from the perspective of a mouse who lives in a bookshop. I was fully expecting this to be typical male fiction that includes details just for the shock value of it and leaves me feeling really gross. In parts, this book hovered right on the edge of that line, but overall it was really good and had some interesting things to say about literature and reading, and it was one of the weirder books I've read. Olivia deals with a girl who goes to boarding school and ends up falling for or obsessing over one of her female teachers. I usually don't like that dynamic, but this book really centered more on Olivia's coming of age than on the one-sided relationship with her teacher. It's not the best book I've ever read, but it definitely was poignant and had meaning. The next surprising book was Origin by Jessica Corey. This is a YA sci-fi book. I really don't hear about this book anywhere, so I expected it to be kind of typical YA tropes that I don't really care for. And while it did have an insta-love dynamic, that was such a small part of the book that I, who cannot stand insta-love, still enjoyed this book. It really focuses more on the main character, the sci-fi elements, and the adventure plot, which I really enjoyed. The next category is older sci-fi written by men. I go into these types of things with my doubts on how much I will enjoy it, and for these two books I came out pleasantly surprised. Aristotle by Walter John Williams is a thick tome of a book. I think it's over 400 pages. And it was really nice to find a book written several decades ago that features a male bisexual character, and it's not an issue. I was very surprised about that. It's a great, sweeping, space travel-y sci-fi adventure. I highly recommend it. Nightfall by Isaac Asimov was my first Asimov book. I didn't know what to expect from Asimov, and this one was actually really well done. It didn't have any of the problematic gender aspects that a lot of older sci-fi tends to have. It was really well crafted, and it's actually one of my 5-star reads of the year. The next surprising book was a heterosexual contemporary romance. I out-romanced myself many years ago because of just how widespread the problematic aspects of heterosexual specific romance is, with the alpha dominant males, and I can't deal with it. But once in a while, I will hear enough about a romance book that I want to give it a chance. Most of the time that doesn't work out. We saw Culty on my DNF list earlier, but this one did work out. What I really appreciated about this book was how consent-driven it was. The characters are constantly checking with each other that everything's okay, that they're not moving too fast, and it was a breath of fresh air. It was also really cute, and I really enjoyed it. The next category are two books that surprised me in how emotionally compromised they made me. Memoirs of a Bookbat is about a girl growing up in a very conservative Christian family, and I just felt for her so deeply. On the complete other end of the spectrum is The Tea Dragon Society, which is a cute, short, graphic novel that is just utterly adorable. The art is so heartwarming, and if you are ever having a bad day, just go to this book and it will make you feel better. It is one of those escapist experiences that I enjoyed so much. And the last category is old vampire horror stories written by women. Neither of these were great, but what I appreciated about both of them is that they are great examples of writing gruesome horror that, yes, it's gross, without sensationalizing it. I feel like a lot of horror these days, especially horror written by men, includes gruesome or problematic aspects in a way that feels like they're fetishizing it more than trying to create a tone. That didn't happen in these books. And finally, let's look at my 12 five-star reads of the year. This slide makes me so happy just to see all the covers of my favorite books of the year. They are a wide range of genres and age groups, which is why I really can't pick like one or two best books of the year. I've got children's graphic novels to sci-fi to young adult to comics to historical to romance, all over the place. These are my 12 five-star reads, favorite books of the year. Highly, highly recommend every single one of them. And that's my 2018 year in review. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my stats or any of the books that I read, and let me know how your 2018 went. Thanks for joining me.